Again, we want to welcome you back live from the pastor's desk, Pastor Tinsley with EG Bible School. And if you've been with us in our last two presentations, we are going through this particular series looking at Jesus' brothers and trying to help the brethren, the laity, the foot soldiers who are anxiously being compelled by the Spirit of God to break out of the humdrum, the normal way of doing things, and seeing Christ's ministry and what he confronted can help us to understand some of the battles that we have to deal with. And as I mentioned in previous previously, that we can deal with what's happening, or maybe the leadership coming, and some people cannot even deal with that because they don't see, and they've never been taught that their obligation to God. They've never seen from the scriptures their commitment to God, and this has not been forcibly brought home on the mind. You know, I'll give a scenario of a young man hearing the message for the first time, and he's wanting to accept Christ. And he begins to find himself in this conflict with his family, with his friends. And he comes to the pastor, evangelist, the Bible worker, whoever's leading them to Christ, whoever the instrument is. And all of a sudden they begin to share the battles and the situation that they're being confronted with in their home and on the workplace, with the friends, family. And the evangelist, the Bible worker, the pastor, tells them and shows them from Scripture how they are obligated to follow God, and how God respects the authority of the parent and recognizes their obligation to society, to their family, but holds out before them that they are called to stand upon the truth, that they are called to respond to the truth when they hear it. And the person makes that commitment. He resolves, that he or she resolves, I'm going to follow Christ at the cost of my job, family, friends. And they stand, the whole church cheers, the pastor, the evangelist is praised. Everyone is praising God. But then all of a sudden, a young man, a young woman joins the church and begins to study the Bible, read the Spirit of prophecy, and begins to notice that there are some things that are not right. Begin to notice that some things in the church are out of place. Some of the teachings are not in harmony with the things that they're reading. And rather than urging that person to continue to follow the convictions of God, they are now somehow led to believe that they must support, uphold, and continue to listen to this blatant error over the convictions of the Spirit and the harmony of the Scriptures. All for what? The sake of this notion of what real unity is and being harmless. But they were not cautioned or reasoned with to be harmless when it came to their family, to their friend, or their workplace. But now when it comes to the church, and then you begin to see that the Bible worker, the pastor, the evangelist, that they had been conditioned to think this way. And they realize that they don't want to rock the boat for fear of what they might be labeled as. So now you begin to see this is all about self-preservation. The cause is not really the motivation, it's self-preservation. There's something else went into the Bible working, the pastoring, or the counseling. Praise God, in spite of our motives, that God works in spite of it. And so what is happening is we're looking at this idea of Jesus' brothers, and we're seeing what Christ was constantly being confronted with. The logic that was constantly being brought in at him that was not in harmony with the scriptures. And this is what we're seeing today. So in our last study, we ended with Jesus being chided by the people for interrupting the traffic of the money changers. Although the priests were responsible, the people felt that Christ had no right to speak or to interfere with what was permitted or voted in by the brethren. Had no right to go against it. But brothers and sisters, I want us to look at this next point. Again, as we move back towards Jesus' brothers and how they responded to him, how the family viewed him. I want us to go in our Bibles, and I want to look at Matthew. Matter of fact, let's go to Mark. Let's go to Mark 3. I like the way Mark puts this. Mark chapter 3. It's also spoken of in Matthew chapter 12 when Jesus and his brethren confronts him because they think that what he is now doing, he is totally out of line for some of the stuff that he's saying and some of in the ways in which he is working. Hindsight, we praise Christ for what he did. But in the present, if Christ was today with the church, he would be disfellowshipped. He would be marginalized, and he would not be permitted to preach in many of our pulpits. And sadly, brothers and sisters, Jesus would not be permitted to work with many of the supporting ministries for fear that he would that his influence would cut into their purse. Now notice, here we are in Mark chapter 3. Mark 3, Jesus is preaching. His name is becoming known. People are flocking to him. The leadership is becoming more and more irate and at the way he's working. And I want you to notice in what it says in Mark 3. We're going to look at verse 20, 20 and 21, and then we're going to jump down to verse 31. All right, now I want you to notice what it says. As a matter of fact, we'll read even verse 22. So Mark chapter 3, verse 20, it says, "And the multitude cometh together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. And when his friends heard of it," not necessarily the eating of bread, but their hearing of his ministry. "And when his friends heard of it, they went out to lay hold on him, for they said, he is beside himself." Jesus is beside himself. He has gone too far in what he's doing. It was okay when he was, we could tolerate him helping the poor, but now Jesus is openly rebuking the leadership of the church. He is openly, in their minds, defying the leadership, God's appointed agency for the salvation of the world. And they felt that Christ was out of line and he needed to be stopped. Why? What was being said about him by the leaders? Verse 22. "And the scribes came down from Jerusalem, said, He hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of devils casteth he out devils." So now, again, this is what the leadership was saying about his ministry. That's not the power of God. Anybody could do that. That's demon possession. Satan is motivating his ministry. Satan is working. God, the Father's never worked in such methods as these. This will never finish the work, what this man is doing, because they thought that the work was taking down the Romans. Just like today, we think that finishing the work involves the exhorting of the denomination and we rallying together to kind of beat up the evangelicals with the true gospel and usher in the second coming. We want to exhort the denomination above all the other denominations, because the notion is God cannot and will not finish the work unless our churches get back together, unless our churches get in harmony. This is why so many people spend so much of their time going among the churches, because again, the idea is the denomination must be brought back. If you were to ask them off camera, they say, no, we don't believe that. No. If we're waiting for the whole church, that will never happen. But the way they work contrary to what they say they believe. But I want you to notice what Jesus does in verse 31. Let's jump down. Jesus' family comes. There came then his brethren and his mother, and standing without, sent unto him, calling him, and the multitude sat about him. And they said unto him, Behold thy mother and thy brethren without seek for thee. He answered, saying, Who is my mother and my brethren? Who are they? And Jesus went on to say, And he looked round about on them which sat about him, and said, Behold my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my mother, my sister, and my mother. Jesus said, listen, they said, your brothers, your family wants to talk to you. Who is my family? Who are my brethren? So he did not, to a degree, believe that any filial connection was to be placed above his commitment to God. And he did not feel that he was obligated to subject his will to what his brethren felt. Now, I want us to notice this passage in Desire of Ages. The chapter is actually coming from the section we're going to read now, 321 and 326. It's actually coming from the chapter, Who is my brethren? I want you to notice now, again, let's go back with dealing with Jesus' brothers. And we said this is the common thinking of how people look at you today as you launch out to do a work that is not in harmony with the way that your brethren. I'm not talking about the leadership now. That's a study in and of itself. But the leadership, their theology had so leavened the people that they thought the same way. So Jesus was fighting two fronts. The leadership rejected his ministry, and the common people were being led to reject his ministry because of the fear of the Pharisees, because of their leaven, because of their teaching, because of the way that they had spun the scriptures in the people's mind. Let's look here. So here, Jesus was working. His attitude toward the Pharisees. Well, let's look at this. This is the first paragraph. It said, the sons of Joseph were far from being in sympathy with Jesus in his work. The reports that reached them in regard to his life and labors filled them with astonishment and dismay. They heard that he devoted entire nights to prayer, that through the day he was thronged by great companies of peoples and did not give himself time so much as to eat. His friends felt that he was wearing himself out by this incessant labor. They were unable to account for his attitude toward the Pharisees, and there were some who feared that his reason was becoming unsettled. So they said, you know what? Christ he's on the verge of destroying himself because his attitude toward the Pharisees and the way that he is working. The way, do you hear the way he talks about the leadership of the church? Do you hear how he talks to the people and what he makes the people believe? He needs to be confronted. His brothers heard this, and also the charge brought by the Pharisees that he cast out devils through the power of Satan. They felt keenly the reproach that came upon them through their relation to Jesus. They knew what a tumult of his words and works created, and were not only alarmed at his bold statements, but indignant at his denunciation of the scribes and of the Pharisees. So wait a minute. So it says that they saw the way that he worked. They heard the charges that were being brought. They were starting to feel a little uncomfortable at church because of people knew that they maybe watched their videos, that they may have translated their sermons into the common tongue so the people in Russia and Romania and Spain could listen to the truth. Maybe because people know that you've gone to their camp meeting and you listen to their preaching and you've been convicted and started to make changes in your life as a result of hearing the Word of God. And all of a sudden you're starting to feel the rebuke. And all of a sudden they feel pressured now that they need to sort of reason with you because they don't like what is happening in your denunciation of the leadership of the church. They feel that you're on the verge of calling the church a name that should never be used by Seventh-day Adventists. But I want you to notice what it goes on to say. They decided that something needed to be done. And they said, you know what? We're going to get Mary. Mary can calm him down. And all of a sudden, so I'm jumping over now to page 326. Jumping over to page 326. I want you to notice now, the paragraph is the enmity kindled with Jesus' brothers. This is why people say and do the things they do to you. The enmity kindled in the human heart against the gospel was keenly felt by the Son of God, and it was most painful to him in his home, for his own heart was full of kindness and love, and he appreciated tender regard in the family relation. His brothers desired that he should concede to their ideas, when such a course would have been utterly out of harmony with his divine mission. So they wanted him to concede to the way that they reasoned in the scriptures versus the way that the scriptures said. But Jesus, if he had conformed to the way that they thought, it would place him out of harmony with the divine mission. Let's move. It says, they looked upon him as in need of their counsel. They judged him from their human point of view and thought that if he would speak only such, watch this, and thought that if he would speak only such things as would be acceptable to the scribes and Pharisees, he would avoid the disagreeable controversy that his words had aroused. Wait a minute. If you would just be harmless as a dove and wise as a serpent, then you would not incur such the wrath of the leadership of the church. If you would not just, you don't have to point out what the leaders are doing in the church. Just ignore what is happening at our colleges. Yeah, you can talk about it with each other, but don't put it out there so others could know about it. Let's just find things you agree on. Don't talk about the fact that every union in the denomination has rejected the vote of the world body. Now, whether you think it's right or wrong, I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with the idea of unity for a moment. regardless that all of our universities have thumbed their noses at a call to turn away from these false teachings that have come in. Forget all of that. Ignore all of those things and just talk about the sanctuary. Let's talk about health reform. Let's deal with things that would be a benefit to people. Let's just talk about the family and let's leave these things alone. But my friends, who knew more about the family than Christ? Who knew more about the body than Christ? Who knew? But is this what Christ dwelt largely upon? He had to break down the fear of the Pharisees, the tyranny that was in the people's minds. We are told in Desire of Ages that Satan had chained the people to his car and was leading them as captives. That had to be broken. And he couldn't break that, brothers and sisters, by just talking about the sanctuary. He had to show them where they were. Let's go on. So they said, if you would just speak things that are agreeable, then you won't have this controversy with the brethren. Let's see. It says, they thought that he was beside himself in claiming divine authority and in placing himself before the rabbis as a reprover of their sins. They knew that the Pharisees were seeking occasions to accuse him, and they felt that he had given them sufficient occasion. Next paragraph. His brothers, watch this, his brothers often brought forward the philosophy of the Pharisees, which was threadbare and hoary in age, and presumed to think that they could teach him who understood all truth, comprehended all mystery. They freely condemned that which they could not understand. Brothers and sisters, now, we want to understand that Jesus' brothers constantly, they brought the arguments of the Pharisees. This is a critical point, because what often do you find when you are being confronted by the brethren, the laity of the church? They bring to you the common arguments that the leadership for years have brought. The church is going through. It appears though it will fall, but it won't. Has God no organized, denominated, you know the quotations. They bring to you statements from selected messages. They bring to you statements from testimonies of ministers. They bring statements from the book Maranatha. All of these Pharisaical arguments that have been brought for years. Even before they were born, these arguments were being used to silence conviction when people saw compromise creeping into the church. They brought these against Emil Andreasen when in the 1950s he confronted duly appointed leadership over their betrayal of sacred trust to God and the trust that the laity had committed to them. When they betrayed that trust by appealing to false teachings and undermined the truth for this time, when he confronted them, all of these statements were used against him. It has even been brought to my attention that over in Europe, a book have been put out to show that Emil Andreasen recanted on his deathbed. No such thing was done, brothers and sisters, because Emil Andreasen did not challenge the teachings of the church. He challenged the betrayal of sacred trust. What do you find people doing today? Are they challenging the scriptures and the truth of God? No, they're confronting the betrayal of sacred trust. They're confronting the betrayal of leadership who have been appointed to be leaders and guide the people, but rather they're undermining the people's confidence by ushering in all of these false teachings into all of our universities. They're ushering these false teachings into predominantly all of our churches. It has come to the point, brothers and sisters, where many of you who will watch this are where it has become normal and commonplace to go to a Seventh-day Adventist church and not expect to hear the truth preached. It has become the norm to sit under error. So normal that even those who would say they're preaching present truth would encourage you to keep sitting up under error. That's how normal and commonplace apostasy has become in the Seventh-day Adventist church, where people who say they're preaching present truth encourage you to sit under darkness. And it has become so normal and so just the commonplace that you still do it. And you would dare leave, complain, and then go back the next week. The battered wife syndrome. And this is a problem, brothers and sisters. So the mindset has to be broken to understand, like we talked about in the beginning of the series, God is working today the way that He's worked in the past. The movements of the present have their parallel with the past. In the past, do you see God using leadership to start the church? No. So will He use leadership to reform the church? No. He's not going to use it. Nicodemus, although people like to cite Nicodemus, but when you read in Desire of Ages, and we'll probably read that in maybe a few of our lessons, that Nicodemus felt that he had lost much. Why? Because he did not unite his ministry to Christ when he was upon the earth. So you can have this Nicodemus mindset, but if you read, Nicodemus felt that he lost so much because he didn't unite himself to Christ. And he thought that he was being wise and helping Christ. But Christ already said, He says, the night has not come. Nicodemus isn't doing that for my ministry. Nicodemus isn't helping the work by any means. He says, my work is in God's hands. He knew that his hour had not yet come. Nicodemus had nothing to do with that hour. And brothers and sisters, you must understand that your degree, certificate, or your networking has nothing to do with God's hour. And this is what you must understand. That does not spare you persecution because you compromise the Word of God to escape ridicule. You cannot follow the mindset of Gideon. Oh, I'll do it at night. And only in the morning to find out that the people still found out it was you. So it would have been better for Gideon to destroy the idol in the midday and allow the power of God to manifest itself by saving him, which would have led others to unite with him. But because he was afraid of what the brethren would think, he did it at night, and his apostate father had to come to his aid. So again, that just caused people to say, hey, we must look to the ministry, the apostate leaders, to save us. So brothers and sisters, when we look at how Christ confronted these issues, then we'll see how God would have us to deal with these things here. And our next section, we are going to see why it culminated and why they felt that Christ needed to die. And you're going to see this, brothers and sisters, and we want to make it plain. So until then, God bless.